Years ago, I was nothing more than a disappointment in my father's eyes. The daughter who chose accounting over construction, spreadsheets over steel and concrete. At family gatherings, he'd introduce me as the one who plays with calculators. What he never realized was this. While he was mocking me in public, I was quietly keeping his entire legacy from collapsing into foreclosure. This is the story of how a courtroom filled with his peers watched everything he believed about me fall apart. Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Sinclair, 32 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened just 3 weeks ago in a Westchester County courtroom. If you're watching, consider subscribing, and tell me where you're watching from. Let me take you back to last Thanksgiving. Picture this. 23 relatives gathered around my father's polished dining table, his table. He made sure everyone knew that. I had just finished explaining how I helped Whitaker Infrastructure restructure their finances, preventing a major IRS audit. Silence. Then my father lifted his glass of bourbon and smirked. Well, when you do real work like your brother Ethan, then we'll talk. Ethan, who develops commercial properties. Me? Just a paper pusher with a CPA license that placed me in the top 5% in New York. That had been my reality for as long as I could remember. Daniel Sinclair, my father, built his name laying foundations across New York for 3 decades. To him, real work meant rough hands and steel-toed boots. My financial credentials might as well have been invisible. At job sites, if clients asked about his family, he'd spend 20 minutes praising Ethan's latest deal, then casually add, "Oh, and Caroline, she works with numbers." The irony? While he dismissed my career, I was managing financial portfolios worth more than everything he had built combined. Every family gathering followed the same script. Ethan's achievements earned applause. Mine were met with polite nods before the conversation shifted away. "Sweetheart, no one really understands what you do anyway," he'd say, usually after his 3rd drink. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I understood numbers well enough to see the disaster coming long before anyone else did. And when it hit, those same calculator games would become the only thing standing between him and total ruin. The Jersey City project was supposed to be his legacy. A $15 million mixed-use development meant to secure his future. Instead, it destroyed everything. In March 2018, his primary investor pulled out. 2 more followed. Within 6 weeks, Sinclair Development Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That project took everything, my mother would later say. Everything except his pride. Their marriage didn't survive it. In early 2019, my mother filed for divorce and moved to San Diego to stay with her sister. She walked away with half of nothing and left behind 30 years of memories. I still remember my father sitting alone in his empty office, surrounded by boxes, insisting it was temporary, that he'd rebuild, come back stronger. Then came Laura Bennett. She met him at a builders convention in 2022. 33, sharp, with a real estate background and just enough legal knowledge to be dangerous. She made my 58-year-old father feel young again, reckless, confident, and untouchable. They got married 6 months later in a quiet courthouse ceremony. I wasn't invited. I had already moved out by then, but I kept coming back to check on the house. "It's just paperwork," he told me over the phone. "You understand, right?" But here's what no one understood: why I stayed. Why I kept showing up every week. Why I kept checking on a man who introduced me as his underachieving daughter. My friends thought I was insane. My therapist used phrases like codependency and unresolved validation. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't read the bankruptcy filings the way I did. They didn't notice the second mortgage, when the first major balloon payment came due. The one that would take the house. Our house. The one where my mother raised us, where my grandmother's rose bush still bloomed every spring. So I made a decision, one that would take 7 years before anyone understood. $6,800. That's what it cost every single month to keep foreclosure away, every month without fail. That routine continued for 7 straight years, quiet, invisible, and completely unnoticed. While my father told his friends I was wasting time with spreadsheets, I was working 3 jobs. Days at a top-tier firm, managing corporate accounts, evenings consulting for Zenith Urban Labs and Blue Peak Engineering, weekends handling forensic accounting for law firms, 4 hours of sleep, protein bars, black coffee. That was my life. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was hiding it. I couldn't pay the mortgage directly. My father would notice, and his pride would explode. So I routed everything through an old joint account he had forgotten existed. The statements were sent to a private P.O. box I controlled, and every time he bragged about saving the house on his own, I stayed quiet. Even when it hurt enough to taste blood. The exhaustion settled into my bones. I missed weddings, canceled dates, spent Christmas Eve in 2020 buried in a client's year-end audit instead of with family. One night, my colleague Sarah Brennan found me slumped over my desk at 3 a.m., and my laptop still glowing with Excel projections. "Caroline, you're going to burn yourself out," she said quietly. "Whatever this is, it better be worth it." Was it? Every time I walked through that front door and saw my grandmother's chandelier still hanging in the foyer, I told myself yes. Every time I passed the pencil marks on the doorframe, tracking Ethan's height, then mine, year after year, I told myself yes, this wasn't just a house, it was our history. I documented everything, every payment, every transfer, every record stored carefully in a safety deposit box at Chase Bank. Just in case, I told myself, though I wasn't even sure what I was preparing for. The filings at the county clerk's office were even more revealing. Public records, accessible to anyone who knew exactly where to look. The morning I made payment number 84, the final one, I sat in my car and cried. Or so I believed. Laura Bennett discovered the value of the house the same way she discovered everything else, by digging where she didn't belong. I caught her one afternoon in my father's study, quietly snapping photos of documents with her phone. "Just organizing Daniel's files," she said, flashing that perfectly rehearsed smile. On her screen, a property estimate glowed, $1.2 million. "Daniel!" I heard her shout later that night, her voice carrying all the way to the driveway. "This house is worth over $1 million, and your ungrateful daughter is circling it like a vulture." That was the thing about Laura. She had just enough legal training to be dangerous, and more than enough manipulation to be convincing. "She's been planning this for years," she pressed. "Why else would a single woman her age still be hanging around? No relationship, no life of her own. She's obsessed with this house." And my father believed her. Of course he did. His young, confident wife warning him about the daughter he already saw as a disappointment? It fit perfectly into the story he had always told himself. "The joke's on her," I heard him say. "I'm updating my will tomorrow." The irony was almost unbearable. While they were discussing how to protect his asset from me, I was the only reason he still had one. But Laura had planted something, and it didn't take long for it to grow. 2 weeks later, she pushed him to get the house appraised. Then she found a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Victor Hale, from Hale & Associates, known for handling high-stakes asset disputes and elder financial abuse claims. The trap was ready. It just needed a trigger, and Laura knew exactly which buttons to press. November 2nd, 2024, 6:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was standing in my kitchen, heating up leftover Thai food, when the doorbell rang. The marshal looked uneasy. "Caroline Sinclair?" When I nodded, he handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served. Have a good evening, ma'am." My hands trembled as I read the heading. Daniel Sinclair. Plaintiff versus Caroline Sinclair. Defendant. The words blurred together. Fraud. Undue influence. Conversion of property. Conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. My father was suing me for $1.2 million plus punitive damages. The complaint read like fiction. According to the filing, I had manipulated a financially vulnerable man during a period of distress, taken advantage of his financial distress, and orchestrated a scheme to steal his home. It claimed I had been living in his house without permission, refusing to leave, ignoring repeated demands. Then I reached page 3, and my chest tightened. Plaintiff requests an emergency hearing to prevent defendant from further damaging or encumbering the property. Hearing date, November 15th, 2024. 13 days. I called my mother in San Diego. She picked up on the second ring, and I heard her gasp the moment I explained. "That man," she whispered. "After everything you've done for him." "Mom, he doesn't know about the payments." "Then tell him. He's already filed the case. He hired Hale and Associates. This is public now. Everyone's going to see it." Silence stretched across the line. Then she asked, steady but firm, "You kept everything, right? Every record?" "Yes." "Then let him destroy himself. Call Andrew Cole. You remember him? From your CPA study group? He's a lawyer now. A good one." I ended the call and stared at the summons. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting, was a note. "Don't embarrass yourself further by fighting this." The war he had started was one he had no chance of winning. He just didn't know it yet. I dialed Andrew. He picked up immediately. "Caroline Sinclair. Wow. To what do I owe the call?" I swallowed. "My father is suing me." The line went silent for 3 seconds. "I'll clear my calendar. How fast can you get to my office?" 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Andrew Cole in his downtown Manhattan office, with 7 years of evidence spread across his conference table. Bank statements, mortgage payments, transfer records, tax returns, my entire hidden life organized in perfect chronological order. Andrew's expression moved from concern to disbelief to something close to anger. "Caroline, you have more leverage than you think," he said, holding up a document I hadn't paid attention to in years. "This deed transfer, June 15th, 2021. Your father signed the house over to you, fully executed. Look at the notary seal." "He was drunk," I said quietly. "Laura had just walked out after a fight. He came to me terrified about losing everything. He thought he was signing refinancing paperwork." Andrew shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It's legal, notarized, filed with the county. You've owned that house, free and clear, for 3 years. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." She meant my grandfather, the man who built that house in 1962 with his own hands. Andrew leaned back in his chair. "Here's what's going to happen. Your father is about to learn a very expensive lesson about gratitude. But Caroline, this will get ugly. He's not just going to lose. He's going to be humiliated. Are you ready for that?" Was I? For 7 years, I had protected him from the consequences of his own failures. I gave up my 20s, my relationships, my health, and in return, he dismissed me, mocked me, and now he wanted to destroy me in court. "Andrew," I said, steady now, "I need one more thing. Pull the Brooklyn Contractors Association directory. I have a feeling he's been inviting an audience." Andrew smiled, sharp, precise. "By the time we're done, the only person being humiliated will be him, and it'll happen in front of everyone whose opinion he cares about." I signed the retainer without hesitation, no turning back. The post in the Builders Association group had exploded. "Over friends and colleagues," my father had written, "I need your support on November 15th at the Westchester County Supreme Court. My own daughter is trying to steal my home through fraud. Come witness what happens when we stand up to entitled millennials who think they deserve everything without earning it. These days have no respect, probably too busy on social media to work. This is why I cut my own son out of my will." Then Andrew scrolled, and my stomach dropped. A comment from Charles Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Infrastructure, one of my biggest clients. "Daniel, is this the same daughter who's a CPA? The one you told me couldn't run a lemonade stand?" My father replied, "That's the one. Biggest disappointment of my life. Never held a real job. Just sits behind a computer all day. Now she wants what I spent 30 years building." Andrew looked at me. "He has no idea, does he? That I saved Whitaker from collapse last year?" I shook my head. "No one knows. I use my mother's maiden name, Mitchell, for all my consulting work. I didn't want his reputation tied to mine. Andrew opened another file. He's also hired a PR firm, Kensington PR Group. They're planning to make this public. There will be media. Caroline, he's not just suing you, he's staging a spectacle. How many people? At least 200 confirmed. 2 chartered buses from the association. He's treating this like an event. I thought about every barbecue, every holiday, every room where those same people had watched him diminish me. They were all coming, expecting a show. Andrew, I need Kevin Brooks from Chase Bank to testify. And someone from the county clerk's office. He nodded. Already in motion. Caroline, your father just signed his own professional obituary. He just doesn't know it yet. Kevin Brooks will be there, Andrew confirmed after a call. Chase is actually eager. They've been wondering how those payments kept coming when your father was technically insolvent. We spent hours organizing all 84 months of payments into clean, structured exhibits, each transfer highlighted, annotated, cross-referenced with my income. The paper trail was flawless. The clerk's office is sending Diane Parker, Andrew added. She's been there over 20 years. She remembers your father from his permit days. She's bringing the original deed with full authentication. And the CEOs? I had worked with them under strict confidentiality agreements, but once the lawsuit became public, they chose to step forward. Whitaker, Blue Peak, Zenith, all submitted statements. Whitaker is flying back from Miami to testify in person. He's not happy about your father's accusations. He wants the truth out. I watched Andrew arrange the evidence like a strategist preparing for battle. Here's the plan, he said. We let your father talk first. Let him describe you as useless, unemployed, manipulative. The deeper he goes, the harder he falls. Andrew, there's something else. Laura used to work at Hale & Associates. His eyes lit up instantly. Conflict of interest. Perfect. We'll save that for the end. He turned back to his laptop. I'm filing a counterclaim, dismissal, legal fees, defamation damages, and a restraining order if this continues. Is that really necessary? He tried to destroy you publicly. We're making sure he never does this again, to you or anyone else. He paused, then added quietly, this isn't revenge, it's boundaries, expensive, very public boundaries. Daddy, if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, type justice in the comments. Because what happened next shocked everyone in that courtroom. And before we continue, make sure you subscribe. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply showing the receipts. November 14th, 11:47 p.m. Sleep was impossible. My laptop screen glowed with 3 emails that had just come in. Charles Whitaker. Caroline, you saved my company. Tomorrow, everyone will know. Blue Peak Engineering. Your audit uncovered $800,000 in internal theft. We owe you everything. Zenith Urban Labs. Your tax strategy saved us $700,000. We're proud to stand with you. Together, I had saved them over $2.7 million. Tomorrow, their CEOs would sit in a courtroom, where my father claimed I had never worked a real job. My phone rang. FaceTime. My mother calling from San Diego. Her eyes were red. I booked a flight. I'll be there by noon. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I should have stood up to him years ago. I won't make that mistake again. She hesitated. There's something you need to know about that deed transfer, back in 2021. My chest tightened. What is it? I was on the phone with him that night. He was drunk, crying about losing everything, and he said something. She paused. He said, "At least Caroline will take care of things. She always does, even when I don't deserve it." Silence. He knew exactly what he was signing, she whispered. He just doesn't remember. I stared at the small metal key resting on my nightstand. Inside that safety deposit box wasn't just paperwork. It was 7 years of quiet sacrifice, love that had taken the shape of responsibility. And tomorrow, that love was finally going to demand recognition. Andrew texted me at 12:15 a.m. Can't sleep either. Remember? Let him go first. Let him tell everyone how useless you are. Every word he says adds another nail to his own coffin. Your silence, at the right moment, will be louder than anything you could say. I pulled the deed out one more time. There it was, printed clearly in black ink. Daniel Sinclair hereby transfers all rights and ownership to Caroline Sinclair, notarized, filed, legally binding. But there was one detail tied to that document that my father definitely didn't know. Something that, revealed at exactly the right moment, would change everything. Westchester County, November 15th, 8:45 a.m. The buses from the Brooklyn Contractors Association were already parked outside, lined up like tour coaches waiting for a crowd. Most of them had driven up from the city early that morning. Men in flannel shirts and steel-toed boots streamed toward the courthouse, most of them carrying Dunkin' coffee cups. I recognized nearly every face. The same men who had stood around at barbecues and holiday parties, laughing as my father dismissed me year after year. "That's her," someone muttered under his breath. "The ungrateful daughter." I counted at least a dozen of my father's poker friends gathered in the lobby. They avoided looking directly at me, but I could feel their judgment from across the room. These were men who had listened to stories about my failures, both real and imagined, for years, over cigars and whiskey. My father arrived at 8:55. Black Mercedes. Laura Bennett at his side, dressed in a tailored designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind them followed a line of attorneys from Hale and Associates, 5 in total, each carrying leather briefcases like they were stepping into battle. "Caroline!" My father's voice carried across the courthouse steps, loud enough to turn heads. "I hope you're ready to apologize and fix this. It's not too late to avoid completely humiliating yourself." Andrew appeared beside me. "Let him perform," he whispered. 3 reporters just started writing. What my father didn't notice were the 3 CEOs sitting quietly in the back rows, or Kevin Brooks from Chase, reviewing documents with focused precision, or Diane Parker from the county clerk's office, holding a sealed folder in her hands. But I noticed something else. At least 15 women scattered throughout the crowd, some wearing hard hats, others in sharp business attire. Contractors, engineers, architects. They weren't here for him. One of them met my eyes briefly and gave a small, knowing nod. The story had traveled further than my father's version of it. Laura leaned in just enough to be heard. "She looks nervous," she said loudly. "Guilty people always do." 200 people filled the courtroom. My father had his audience. He just didn't realize who they'd be applauding by the end. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Whitman." Judge Whitman entered at exactly 9 a.m. Silver hair pulled back tightly, black robes immaculate. Her eyes swept across the packed gallery, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "Mr. Hale," she said, her tone controlled, "is there a reason this courtroom is full for what should be a routine property dispute?" Victor Hale stood composed and confident. "Your Honor, given the seriousness of the financial exploitation allegations, my client believed community support was appropriate." "I see." Her tone made it clear. She saw right through the performance. "Proceed." Hale launched into his opening statement like a man who had rehearsed it a dozen times. "Your Honor, this is a clear and troubling case of financial exploitation. Daniel Sinclair, a respected contractor who built his reputation over 3 decades, is being systematically defrauded by his own daughter." He gestured toward me as if I were evidence. "She has refused to vacate his residence, manipulated financial documentation, and taken advantage of his vulnerability during a time of financial distress." I watched my father nod along, jaw tight with righteous certainty. Laura rested a hand gently on his shoulder, playing the supportive wife flawlessly. "The defendant," Hale continued, "has no verifiable employment history, no independent assets, and has been living parasitically off her father's generosity. We will demonstrate a pattern of calculated deception spanning several years. This is not misunderstanding. This is intentional fraud." Andrew rose slowly. Your Honor, the defense will show that these accusations are not only false, but so detached from reality that they rise to the level of malicious prosecution. We have documentary evidence that will fundamentally alter the facts of this case. Judge Whitman glanced between us. Mr. Sinclair, please take the stand. My father walked forward with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He adjusted the microphone, looked directly at me, and smiled. The performance had begun. State your name for the record. Daniel Sinclair, he said firmly. Owner of Sinclair Development Group for 30 years, until my daughter destroyed everything. Judge Whitman's eyes narrowed slightly. Mr. Sinclair, please limit your answer to the question. Hale stepped closer. Mr. Sinclair, can you describe your daughter's employment history? My father leaned toward the microphone like he was telling a story at a bar. She's never held a real job in her life, Your Honor. She plays with spreadsheets, calls it accounting. Meanwhile, real professionals like myself and my son Ethan actually build things. We create real value. And her current living situation? She refuses to leave my house, has been there for years, squatting basically. Probably waiting for me to die so she can take everything. He turned slightly toward his poker friends. I tried to be a good father, gave her opportunities, but she's always been after my money. Do you have proof of her unemployment? He laughed. Proof? Look at her. 32, no husband, no family, completely fixated on my house. I doubt she even knows what a mortgage payment looks like, let alone how to calculate interest. A few men in the gallery chuckled. Laura smiled faintly. Andrew leaned closer to me. Perfect, he whispered. That's at least 3 counts of perjury already. The plaintiff calls Laura Bennett. She walked to the stand with measured confidence, her heels clicking against the floor like she was stepping onto a stage. She placed her manicured hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth without hesitation. Mrs. Sinclair, Hale began, please describe your stepdaughter's behavior. Laura sighed softly, her expression carefully composed. It's concerning, Your Honor. Deeply concerning. Her voice carried just enough emotion to sound convincing. I've seen her go through Daniel's private documents multiple times. She keeps stacks of financial records hidden in her room, almost obsessively. It doesn't feel normal. Can you elaborate? She tilted her head slightly as if choosing her words carefully. She's fixated on this house. Completely fixated. She shows up at the house at strange hours, Laura continued, her voice steady but calculated. Sometimes she just sits in the driveway, staring at it. She's told me more than once that the house belongs to her, and that Daniel owes her everything. It's unsettling, honestly. A 32-year-old woman this obsessed with her father's property, that's not normal. A low wave of murmurs moved through the courtroom. One of the reporters in the front row started writing rapidly. Mrs. Sinclair, Hale said, leaning in slightly, have you observed anything unusual regarding financial activity? Laura lowered her voice, as if sharing something confidential. I found bank statements hidden in her old room, large sums moving through different accounts, complicated transfers, the kind designed to conceal something. I used to work as a paralegal. I recognize money laundering when I see it. Andrew leaned toward me, barely moving his lips. Perfect. Let them keep going. And how would you describe her relationship with Mr. Sinclair? She manipulates him constantly, Laura said without hesitation. She uses guilt, about the divorce, about the bankruptcy. She knows exactly which emotional buttons to push. Just last month, I overheard her on the phone saying everything was going according to plan, and that he had no idea what was coming. Your Honor, I'm genuinely concerned about what she might be capable of. Judge Whitman's expression hardened slightly. Do you have any documentation to support these claims? Laura hesitated. Well, no, but I see. You may step down. As she returned to her seat, Laura shot me a satisfied smile. My father reached over and squeezed her hand. Andrew stood. Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed. Go ahead, Mr. Cole. The entire room seemed to shift forward, but Hale wasn't finished. Your Honor, before the defense begins, I would like to submit these bank records into evidence. He lifted a thick stack of documents with deliberate flair. These records show repeated transfers from concealed accounts to the mortgage holder over several years. Classic indicators of financial manipulation and potentially money laundering, as Mrs. Sinclair accurately suggested. The courtroom buzzed. I knew something was off about her, someone whispered. And these transfers, Hale continued, raising his voice slightly, began immediately after Mr. Sinclair's bankruptcy, when he was at his most vulnerable. The defendant clearly saw an opportunity and exploited it. My father suddenly stood. She's been stealing from me for years, Your Honor. While I was trying to rebuild my life, she was plotting behind my back. Mr. Sinclair, sit down, Judge Whitman warned sharply. But it was too late. The room had shifted. I could feel it, like heat pressing in from all sides. Gold digger, someone shouted. Shame on you. Laura dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her performance flawless. This is exactly what you expect, she said loudly, from someone with no real career, no real accomplishments. Hale stepped forward, sensing momentum. Your Honor, we are looking at a 32-year-old woman who has never held legitimate employment, living off her father, manipulating financial records, and now attempting to seize his only remaining asset. This isn't just fraud, he paused. It's a betrayal of the most fundamental trust between parent and child. And the gallery was fully on their side now. I saw disgust on faces I had known since childhood. Even Charles Whitaker was watching in tense silence, as if trying to reconcile what he thought he knew about me. This, my father said, turning slightly toward his audience, is what happens when you raise an entitled child, someone who thinks the world owes her everything. She never learned what hard work looks like. Never built anything. She just takes, always takes. Judge Whitman looked directly at me. Miss Sinclair, your counsel may proceed. Andrew stood slowly, deliberately. In his hand, a single manila folder. Your Honor, he said calmly, the defense calls the defendant to the stand. My legs felt unsteady as I stood. 200 pairs of eyes followed me as I walked to the witness box. Here come the excuses, someone whispered. I placed my hand on the Bible. 7 years pressed down on my shoulders at once. The courtroom fell silent, except for the faint scratch of reporters' pens. Miss Sinclair, Andrew said, voice steady, do you have something to present to the court? I opened my briefcase carefully, even though my heart was pounding. Yes, Your Honor. I would like to submit Exhibit A. The manila folder felt heavier than it should. Inside it, one document. The one that would change everything. Your Honor, the plaintiff's filing was rushed under false representations, and critical property records were either misrepresented or overlooked. Your Honor, this is a certified copy of a deed transfer from the Westchester County Clerk's office. Hale shot to his feet. Objection. This document was not presented during discovery. Andrew didn't flinch. It's a public record, Your Honor. However, due to the way the filing was structured, it was not properly reviewed by the plaintiff's counsel before submission. The document was filed under a different indexing category, which made it less visible during standard title searches. Judge Whitman nodded. I'll allow it. Continue. I held the document up, turning it slightly so the official seal caught the light. This deed, dated June 15, 2021, transfers full ownership of the property in Scarsdale, New York, from Daniel Sinclair to Caroline Sinclair. Silence. Complete silence. My father's mouth opened. No sound came out. That's not possible, he finally said. I never signed anything like that. I took a breath. For 7 years, I had said nothing. No more, I said quietly. Your Honor, this document was signed, notarized, and filed with the county over 3 years ago, the house my father is suing me for. I looked straight at him. I already own it. I've owned it since 2021. The ownership had changed, but the mortgage hadn't. For a second, no one moved. Laura shot to her feet. That's fraud! She forged it! For the first time, the confidence in her eyes cracked, replaced by something closer to fear. Judge Whitman struck the gavel. Order. Miss Sinclair, can anyone verify the authenticity of this document? I turned slightly toward the gallery. Yes, Your Honor. Diane Parker from the county clerk's office is present. The crowd parted as she stood, holding her own folder. Diane Parker walked forward with calm authority, the kind that comes from decades of handling legal records. She was sworn in quickly. Ms. Parker, Andrew began, can you confirm this document? She opened her folder, revealing the original deed with its raised seal. This is the original deed transfer, filed June 15, 2021, at 3:47 p.m. I processed it personally. She held it up. You can see Mr. Daniel Sinclair's signature here. Notarized by Jennifer Walsh, license number 487291. That's impossible, my father shouted. I would never. Diane didn't raise her voice. Mr. Sinclair, you appeared distressed, but you clearly stated multiple times that you understood the document and wished to proceed. You repeatedly stated your daughter was the only person who truly cared about you, and that you wanted to make things right. A ripple of shock moved through the room. The notary hesitated, she added, but you insisted you were of sound mind. The courtroom erupted, people turning to each other, reporters writing frantically. And one more thing, Diane said calmly. You returned the following week to confirm the transfer had been completed. You said, she glanced at her notes, I want to make sure Caroline gets what she deserves for everything she's done. Laura's face went pale. Daniel, you told me the house was yours. Judge Whitman looked down at the document, then back at Hale. Mr. Hale, your client is suing Miss Sinclair for a property she legally owns and has owned for 3 years. How do you explain that? For the first time, Hale had no answer. He flipped through his papers, searching. But that's not all, Your Honor, I said, standing a little straighter now. I would like to submit Exhibit B. Andrew handed over another folder. 84 consecutive mortgage payments, he said, all made from the defendant's personal accounts. Your Honor, I continued, Kevin Brooks from Chase Bank is here to verify these payments. My father sank back into his chair. No, that's not... She couldn't. Oh, but I did, Dad, I said quietly. Every single month, for 7 years, while you called me worthless. I was protecting everything you had left. The room had changed. No more whispers of judgment. Now, they were staring at him. Kevin Brooks took the stand, carrying a thick folder that he placed carefully in front of him. Mr. Brooks, Andrew began, can you explain these payments? Of course, he said calmly. From April 2018 through March 2025, exactly 84 consecutive payments of $6,800 were made on the mortgage for the Scarsdale property. Every single payment came from accounts owned by Caroline Sinclair. He opened the folder, page after page of statements. The total amount paid, $571,200. Without these payments, the property would have gone into foreclosure proceedings by late 2018. And Mr. Daniel Sinclair's contributions during that time? Kevin didn't hesitate. 0. A pause. Not a single payment. In fact, Mr. Sinclair has not maintained an active account with our institution since his bankruptcy filing. The courtroom fell into complete silence. I watched my father's face begin to collapse as the truth settled in. That's not possible, Laura whispered, loud enough for the entire room to hear. Daniel told me he was handling all the payments himself. Kevin didn't react. Ms. Sinclair consistently made these payments while working extreme hours. Our records show transfers at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., sometimes just minutes after her direct deposits from Ernst & Young cleared. She never missed a single payment, even when it left her personal accounts nearly empty. A chair scraped loudly. One of the contractors stood up. Daniel, you told us she was draining you, said she was bleeding you dry. Judge Whitman raised her gavel sharply. Sir, sit down. Andrew reached for another document. Mr. Brooks, can you confirm this transaction from December 2019? Kevin nodded. Yes. Ms. Sinclair paid $27,500 to stop foreclosure when the balloon payment came due. She liquidated her entire 401k, incurring significant penalties, to protect the property. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. In the back row, my mother, who had slipped in quietly during the testimony, was crying. My father's voice came out barely audible. "But why didn't she tell me?" "Because you would have refused," I said, my voice steady now. "And because I thought protecting you mattered more than being seen. Your pride would have chosen losing the house over accepting help from your disappointment of a daughter. So I did what I've always done." I looked at him. "I fixed everything quietly, while you took the credit." Laura was gripping his arm now, whispering urgently about leaving, but he didn't move. He just stared at the documents like he couldn't understand what he was seeing. "Your Honor," Andrew said, stepping forward, "we have additional witnesses regarding Ms. Sinclair's employment history." A man stood up from the gallery. The room shifted instantly. Charles Whitaker, one of the biggest names in New York construction. "Your Honor," he said, "may I speak?" Judge Whitman nodded. "Take the stand." Charles Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Infrastructure. He turned slightly toward my father. "The same company Mr. Sinclair has been trying to secure a contract with for the past 5 years." After being sworn in, his voice carried across the courtroom. "Last year, Caroline Sinclair saved my company from collapse. She uncovered $1.1 million in internal embezzlement that our previous accounting team missed. She worked day and night for nearly 3 weeks, rebuilding 5 years of financial records and helping us recover most of the losses." The room erupted into whispers. My father didn't move, didn't blink. "She saved 58 jobs," Whitaker continued, "including my son's, and she did it under the name C. Mitchell, because she didn't want any connection to her father's business influencing the outcome." He paused. "She refused public credit. She just wanted to fix the problem." Andrew didn't hesitate. "The defense calls its next witness, Daniel Reeves, CEO of Blue Peak Engineering." Reeves stepped forward. "Miss Sinclair redesigned our entire financial infrastructure. In the first year alone, she saved us over $900,000. She's not just a CPA, she's among the top-tier forensic accountants in the state. We offered her $250,000 annually to join us full-time." He glanced at me. "She declined, said she had family responsibilities." The third witness stepped up. Lena Joe, CEO of Zenith Urban Labs. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Caroline Sinclair earns over $320,000 annually from consulting alone. That doesn't include her salary from Ernst & Young. She is one of the most in-demand financial strategists in New York." She turned toward my father. "And half the contractors sitting in this room have benefited from her work, whether they realize it or not." Recognition spread like wildfire. "Wait, C. Mitchell, that was her? She handled my audit last year. She saved me from penalties with the IRS." My father had gone completely pale. Laura looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Whitman fixed her gaze on him. "Mr. Sinclair, do you still maintain your daughter has never held a real job?" The sound he made wasn't even a word. It was something between a breath and a collapse. This can't be real," he muttered, hands shaking as he reached for a glass that wasn't there. She's just what, Daniel?" A voice from the gallery. "Mike Brennan, 15 years at every poker table. Just the daughter you've been trashing while she kept your house from foreclosure? She saved my company last year, and I didn't even know it was her." Hale shot to his feet. "Your Honor, we request a recess." "Sit down, Mr. Hale," Judge Whitman said firmly. "Your client invited an audience to witness his daughter's humiliation. They may remain to witness the truth." Laura was already edging toward the aisle. "I need the restroom," she whispered, but the panic in her voice carried across the room. "You will remain seated, Mrs. Sinclair," the judge ordered. The courtroom had transformed, voices rising, recognition spreading. "She fixed my contracts last spring. She saved me tens of thousands in taxes. Daniel, you told us she didn't work." Phones started coming out. One, then another. Within seconds, dozens of screens were recording. Andrew leaned toward the bench, holding up his phone. "You're in the last 10 minutes. Would you like me to read them?" "That won't be necessary." Whitaker stood again. "Daniel, I'm terminating all negotiations with you effective immediately. I don't do business with men who sue their own children. especially for property those children paid for. One voice followed, then another, then four more. His professional network was collapsing in real time, and everyone was watching. "Please," my father whispered. But it wasn't clear who he was pleading with. His eyes moved rapidly, from me, to the judge, to the doors. Like a man looking for an exit that no longer existed. Can you imagine what that looked like? After 7 years of calling me worthless, the truth had finally caught up to him. If you believe families should support each other, not tear each other down, take a second to like this video. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is simple: proof. Now let me tell you what happened next. Judge Whitman looked at me. "Miss Sinclair, would you like to address the court?" I stood slowly, 200 eyes on me. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment in the room. "Your Honor," I said quietly, "there's something I need to say." I paused. "Despite everything you've heard today, he's still my father." My father's head snapped up, tears streaming down his face. "When your business collapsed, when Mom left, when the bank started calling." I steadied my voice. "You were still my father. That's why I did it. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, but because that's what family does. We show up, even when it's hard, even when we're invisible." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. But there comes a point when love turns into enabling, when sacrifice turns into self-destruction. I unlocked the screen. "My mother sent this to me last night." I read it out loud. "My darling daughter, for 7 years, I've watched you run yourself into the ground trying to save a man who couldn't even say thank you. You are not his bank account. You are not his emotional punching bag. You are not responsible for his failures. You are my brilliant, successful daughter, and you deserve respect. It's time you start demanding it." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Several women were nodding. A few were wiping tears from their eyes. I looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, I can't keep living like both his financial safety net and his public embarrassment." I took a breath. I won't sit at family dinners where I'm mocked for the very career that saved his house. I won't smile politely while he tells people I'm worthless, then quietly transfer thousands of dollars to keep him afloat. Then I turned and faced him. "Dad, I loved you enough to give up my 20s, my relationships, my health." My voice didn't shake anymore. "But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It doesn't mean being grateful for scraps of acknowledgement. And it definitely doesn't mean letting you drag me into court to try and take something I already own." Andrew stepped forward and handed me one final document. I placed it on the table. "Your Honor, this is a request for a restraining order. Not because I'm afraid of him physically, but because I need boundaries." I looked down briefly. Real boundaries. Legal ones. My father broke. Not just tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes when everything a person believes about themselves collapses. "You gave me life, Dad," I said quietly. "I gave you 7 years." I paused. "We're even." Judge Whitman removed her glasses slowly, cleaning them with measured precision. The entire courtroom held its breath. "In over 3 decades on the bench," she said, her voice firm and unmistakable, "I have rarely seen a case that so clearly illustrates the difference between legal wrongdoing and moral failure." She looked directly at him. "Mr. Sinclair, you did not simply bring a frivolous lawsuit. You orchestrated a public humiliation of the very person who protected you from financial ruin." A pause. "You invited hundreds of people here to watch your daughter fall, only to discover she has been the one holding you up all along." He couldn't even look at her. "This case is dismissed with prejudice." Her voice was final. "Mr. Sinclair, you are ordered to pay all legal fees, yours and your daughter's, totaling $62,000. You have no claim, now or ever, to the Scarsdale property." She turned toward me. "Miss Sinclair, your request for a restraining order is granted, Mr. Sinclair is prohibited from approaching within 500 feet of you unless contact is explicitly initiated by you. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." The gavel came down. hard. Additionally, Mr. Sinclair, she continued, this court will enter a formal censure into the public record. Your conduct today was not only legally baseless, it was morally indefensible. A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Voices rose as people turned to each other in disbelief. Some exchanged stunned looks, others leaned forward, trying to process what they had just heard. Even some of the contractors, stunned, nodded in agreement. Mr. Sinclair, the judge said over the noise, you should be ashamed. This young woman saved your home, your dignity, and asked for nothing but basic respect. Instead, you gave her ridicule and litigation. Her voice sharpened. You are precisely the kind of father people warn their daughters about. Hale was already packing his files, face flushed. We will not be filing an appeal, Your Honor. I would advise against it, she replied. This matter is concluded. Court is adjourned. The final strike of the gavel echoed. My father collapsed forward, shoulders shaking. The moment the judge exited, the courtroom exploded into chaos. 5 contractors surrounded him before he could even stand. Some spoke immediately, others pulled out their phones, sending messages, canceling agreements in real time. Our deal is terminated, effective immediately, one of them said loudly. I don't work with men who sue their own daughters for houses those daughters paid for. Same here, another added. That Midtown project? Find someone else. One by one, publicly, deliberately. By the end of the day, the calls had started. By the end of the week, the contracts were gone. Each cancellation announced in front of the same audience he had gathered to watch me fall. Laura was gone. Someone later said they saw her in the parking garage, throwing her ring at his car before getting into a rideshare. She lasted exactly as long as the money did. My phone started vibrating. A message from the Contractors Association president. Emergency board meeting. Membership under review. But the real damage was already spreading online. Someone had live-streamed the entire hearing, tens of thousands of views. Climbing. Worst father in New York. He sued her for a house she paid for? He just destroyed himself. Live. Hale approached my father with documents. Mr. Sinclair, this is our formal withdrawal. Our firm will no longer represent you. Then he turned to me. Miss Sinclair, I owe you an apology. I was misinformed. He hesitated, then added, loud enough for others to hear. And Laura Bennett? She used to work for us. That prior relationship was never properly disclosed to the court, and she was dismissed from our firm for ethical violations. That should have told me everything. My father finally stood, slowly, looking around the room like he didn't recognize where he was. His poker friends were gone. The same men who had laughed with him had left without a word. Andrew showed me his phone. You're trending, he said. Top post. Contractor sues daughter for house she secretly paid off. Gets destroyed in court. My father walked out alone. No entourage, no confidence. Just a legal bill, and a reputation in ruins. I found him in the parking lot, sitting on the hood of his car, the cold November air cutting through everything. Caroline, his voice sounded hollow. Don't. I stopped several feet away, keeping the distance. You don't get to play the victim now. You ruined me, he said weakly. I shook my head. No, Dad, you ruined yourself. I just stopped hiding the truth. He looked up at me, eyes red, swollen. Why didn't you tell me about the payments? I met his gaze. Would you have let me? Or would your pride have rather lost the house than accept help from the daughter you called a failure? He flinched. I didn't mean— Yes, you did. My voice was calm now, every word precise. Every joke at Thanksgiving, every comment at your poker nights, every time you praised Ethan while pretending I didn't exist. A pause. You meant all of it. Silence settled between us. Cold, heavy. Finally, he whispered, What happens now? Now, I said calmly, you face consequences. Your business survives, or it doesn't. Your reputation recovers, or it doesn't. But it's not my responsibility anymore. Caroline, please. I'm your father. I held his gaze. You were my father when you dragged me into court. You were my father when you stood in front of 200 people and called me a gold digger. Being my father doesn't erase what you did. I reached into my bag and pulled out a business card. This is Dr. Patricia Reeves, I said. She specializes in narcissistic personality patterns and family trauma. You're going to need help understanding why you did this. He took the card with trembling fingers. And if I go? He asked quietly. If I get help? Then maybe, someday, we can have a conversation that doesn't end with you humiliating me. I paused. But that's not today, and it won't be tomorrow. I took a breath. The house is mine, legally, morally, practically. He looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't. You can rent the guest house, I added. $1,500 a month, below market. I met his eyes again. Because despite everything, I'm not cruel, but there will be a lease, rules, and consequences. I'm sorry, he whispered. I shook my head. No, you're sorry you got caught. That's not the same thing. I turned to leave, then stopped. Dad, I'm done being your emotional and financial safety net. A pause. It's time you learn how to stand on your own. And then I walked away, leaving him alone in the parking lot with nothing but the truth. By Monday morning, my inbox had exploded. 15 new client inquiries, all from people who had either been in that courtroom or watched the video. We had no idea C. Mitchell was you, one message read. Daniel always said you were unemployed. We'd like to discuss a retainer immediately. On Tuesday, the New York Times Metro section picked up the story. CPA daughter saves father's home, then gets sued. They had somehow gotten a photo of my father in the courtroom, face buried in his hands. The subtitle read, How One Woman's Silent Sacrifice Became the City's Most Talked About Family Case. My mother flew in Wednesday. We sat in the living room, my living room, now over 3 million views. This one's my favorite, she said, laughing softly through tears. She read it aloud. Imagine being so ungrateful you sue the person who saved your house. 48,000 likes, she added. On Thursday, the Women in Business Council called. Miss Sinclair, we'd like to honor you at our annual gala. Your story has resonated with women everywhere, especially those who've been overlooked while quietly holding everything together. Andrew forwarded me a LinkedIn post later that afternoon. 3 different executive search firms had already written about me. The hidden financial strategist behind multiple corporate recoveries. The CPA who rebuilt companies while being dismissed at home. But the moment that stayed with me most came Friday afternoon. Charles Whitaker called personally. Caroline, he said, his voice sincere. I should have stood up for you sooner. I knew Daniel was difficult, but I didn't know the truth. A pause. I'd like to offer you the position of Chief Financial Officer. I didn't speak. $400,000 base, he continued, plus equity. By the end of that week, the story had outgrown the courtroom. It wasn't just family drama anymore. It had become something else. A signal for anyone who had ever been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. Week 2 brought consequences, real ones. The Contractors Association voted unanimously to revoke my father's membership. The letter was formal, but ruthless. Your conduct reflects values incompatible with our organization. Laura filed for divorce that same week. But the real shock came when a media outlet picked up something else. Photos surfaced of her dining with Victor Hale, champagne glasses raised, the night after the trial. My father's business collapsed faster than anyone expected. By Wednesday, he had lost nearly 70% of his contracts. The remaining clients stayed only because they were mid-project and couldn't afford to leave immediately. His business page was flooded with 1-star reviews. He sued his own daughter for a house she paid for. Definition of ungrateful. He sold the Mercedes, then the boat, the one he had proudly named Self-Made. A garage sale notice appeared in the classifieds, a quiet public admission of everything he had lost. My brother Ethan called from Arizona. I didn't know, he said. Dad told me you were living off him. I'm sorry I believed it. The golden child. Finally saw the truth. Whitaker Infrastructure announced my CFO appointment in a press release. They included the case. Deliberately. We are proud to welcome Caroline Sinclair, whose expertise has saved multiple companies, while being publicly underestimated in her own family. The story spread across every business outlet on the East Coast. By the end of week 2, Daniel Sinclair had gone from respected contractor to cautionary example. Pride comes before a fall, and his fall had been public, complete, and entirely self-inflicted. I stood in my grandmother's house, my house, making decisions I wouldn't have even imagined a month earlier. The contractor I hired for renovations? A woman named Sarah Brennan, Mike Brennan's daughter, one of the women who had stood up and applauded in that courtroom. We'll convert it into 2 separate units, Sarah explained, spreading the blueprints across the kitchen table. Main house for you, and a fully independent guest unit with its own entrance. She tapped the layout. Good boundaries make good neighbors, even when the neighbor is family. The renovation was estimated at $95,000, but in this area, the guest unit could easily bring in $4,200 a month. It would pay for itself in under 2 years. Though at that moment, I had different plans for it. My mother stood quietly in the doorway of what would become her apartment. Honey, I don't need this. Mom, I said gently, you walked away from everything just to get out of that marriage. Let me give something back. I stepped closer. You can stay as long as you want. A pause. Even forever. That's when she cried. Not out of sadness, but the kind of relief that only comes when someone who's been strong for too long finally gets to stop. I kept the things that mattered. My grandmother's chandelier, the pencil marks carved into the doorframe, tracking our height year after year. Everything else was getting rebuilt. This house would finally serve a purpose, not as a monument to my father's ego, not as a burden I carried in silence, but as something real, an investment, a future. During demolition, Sarah's crew found something unexpected, hidden behind one of the walls. A small metal box, a time capsule, placed there in 1962. Inside was a photograph from the day the house was first built, and a handwritten note. May this home always shelter those who need it most, and may it never become a source of family conflict. I framed that note and hung it exactly where my father's old Sinclair development photo used to be. For the first time, the house felt like what it was meant to be. Not a battleground, a sanctuary. December came, snow covering everything. A message from Ethan appeared on my phone. Dad's living in his truck. I found him at a Dunkin' at 6 a.m. He looked 10 years older, maybe more. His hands trembled as he lifted his coffee. The man who had walked into court with confidence was gone. Ethan told you, he said. Not a question. You can't survive a New York winter in a truck, I replied. I don't have a choice, he said. No one will rent to me after all of that. He gestured vaguely toward everything. I placed a lease agreement on the table. Guest house, I said, $1,500 a month, first and last up front. I met his eyes. These are my terms. He read slowly, through tears. Weekly therapy with Dr. Reeves. Meetings twice a week. No overnight guests without written approval. He looked up. These are strict. They're boundaries, I said. Something we should have had years ago. Why? His voice cracked. After everything, why would you do this? Because I'm not going to enable you, I said calmly. But I'm also not going to let you be homeless. A pause. This isn't forgiveness. It's structure. I folded my hands. You need a place to live. I need a tenant who respects the property. I held his gaze. This is business now, not family. He signed, his hand shaking. For the first time in my life, I saw him cry without hiding it. Not defensive, not angry, just broken. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me, I said. Thank the woman who built this house to protect people who needed it. AI stepped back. And Dad, if you break even one condition, just one, you're out. He nodded. He understood. This wasn't reconciliation. This was accountability. Andrew reviewed the lease one last time before the notary arrived. This is more detailed than most corporate contracts, he said, impressed. The terms were absolute. $1,500 monthly rent, below market value, no alcohol allowed on the property, mandatory therapy with documented attendance, AA meetings, verified weekly, no negative statements about me to anyone, no guests without 48-hour written notice, monthly property inspections, quiet hours strictly enforced, optional family therapy, initiated only by me. If any term is violated, I told the notary, eviction begins immediately. My father signed every page, without arguing, without resisting. The man who once controlled every room now sat quietly, accepting terms from the daughter he tried to destroy. The family therapy clause, he said softly. You said, if you choose. Will you? Not now, I replied. Maybe not ever. A pause. That depends entirely on what you do next. The notary stamped the final page. It was official. Daniel Sinclair was now my tenant, paying rent on a house he once claimed was stolen from him. I handed him the keys. The unit is fully furnished, I said, utilities included. Your first therapy session is Monday at 10 a.m. I held his gaze. Don't miss it. Caroline, I stopped him. No speeches, no promises. A beat. Just actions. I turned slightly. Prove you can follow basic rules. Another step. Prove you understand respect. He stood there, holding the keys, like they weighed more than anything he had ever carried. He stood to leave, then turned back. The house looks different. Renovations, I replied simply. He nodded slowly, taking it in. Yeah, your mom mentioned she's moving into the main level unit. I met his eyes. The house is finally becoming what Grandma intended, a place for people who treat each other with respect. The message didn't need to be said out loud. Respect wasn't automatic, it was earned. And without it, he wasn't my father. He was my tenant. February brought changes I hadn't expected. Dr. Reeves called, with his permission. He's been sober for 90 days, she told me, but more importantly, he's starting to understand the patterns. She paused. His father spoke to him the same way he spoke to you. The difference is, you ended the cycle. She told me he had started journaling, writing letters he would never send, unpacking years of inherited shame, rigid masculinity, and emotional repression. He had even joined a support group for people learning to confront narcissistic behaviors from the inside. The first email came on Valentine's Day. Caroline, Dr. Reeves says I'm not ready to give a real apology yet, because I don't fully understand what I'm apologizing for. But I want you to know I'm trying. I'm learning terms like emotional labor, financial control. I'm learning that love isn't supposed to come with scorekeeping. Your tenant, Daniel. He signed it your tenant, not your father. That mattered. My business had taken off. But none of it had come easily, and none of it had come without cost. The announcement from Whitaker Infrastructure triggered a wave of new opportunities. Revenue jumped more than 150% in a matter of months. I hired 2 junior CPAs just to keep up. The woman who had never held a real job was now running a growing financial consulting firm. My mother settled fully into her apartment. She filled it with plants, paintings, light. Sometimes I'd see her and Daniel cross paths in the driveway. A quiet nod. Nothing more. Boundaries. Holding. Ethan visited in March. The 3 of us, Mom, Ethan, and I, had dinner in the main house. Daniel stayed in the guest unit. He knows he's not invited yet, Ethan said quietly, and he's not pushing it. He shook his head slightly. That alone is a big change. Change was possible, but trust? That would take time, years maybe. And for the first time in my life, That timeline wasn't mine to manage. Daniel was learning something he had never understood before. Respect doesn't come from blood. It comes from behavior. 3 months later, I signed a book deal with a major publisher. Financial Abuse in Families, a guide to boundaries and recovery release scheduled for spring. The advance alone was more than he had ever earned in his best year. The story had spread far beyond New York. Hundreds of emails came in, from people trapped in the same cycle, successful adults still chasing approval that would never come, people funding families who mocked them, people confusing obligation with love. Family should support you, I told a journalist from Forbes. Not use you, not diminish you. I paused. We're taught that family is everything, but sometimes everything becomes too much. Daniel posted a public apology. Not because I asked, because Dr. Reeves said it was part of his process. On the same page, where he had once invited people to watch me fall. I was wrong. I sued my daughter for a house she paid for. I mocked her while she was saving my life. I chose pride over truth and lost everything that mattered. I'm in therapy now, trying to become the father I should have been. To everyone who saw what I did, I'm sorry. To Caroline, I know sorry isn't enough, but it's where I'm starting. It was shared over 60,000 times. The responses were split. Too late. At least he's trying. I didn't respond. Because public apologies aren't proof of change. Because change isn't something you announce. It's something you prove, quietly, consistently, over time. For years, I believed love meant endurance. That being a good daughter meant fixing what others broke, staying silent when I was diminished, and giving more even when I was left with nothing. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission for someone to keep taking. What I learned is this: respect is not inherited, it's earned. And no amount of sacrifice can replace it. You can show up for people, you can support them, but you are not responsible for saving someone who refuses to value you. Walking away from that role didn't make me heartless, it made me whole. And if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this: you are allowed to stop proving your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. Protect your peace, set your boundaries, and don't apologize for choosing yourself. And if this story resonated with you, even just a little, take a moment to pause and reflect on your own boundaries. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel like your worth had to be proven, this is your reminder that it doesn't. Hit the like button so more people can hear stories like this, because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. Share this video with someone who's been giving too much and receiving too little. Sometimes one story is enough to change the way we see ourselves. And I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what's one boundary you've learned to set in your life? Your story might help someone else feel seen. The strongest thing you can do is finally choose yourself. Thank you for being here.